now have two introductory comments. First one by Mr. Brett Schaefer. Brett is the J. Kingham Senior Research Fellow in the International Regulatory Affairs in Heritage Foundation's Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom. He, in 2019 and 2021, he was appointed by the UN General Assembly to serve on the Committee on Contributions, and he has been the editor of the series of essays on first principles on human rights published by Heritage Foundation, which recalls the special character of natural rights and fundamental freedoms. Brett, the floor is yours.
Good morning. I'd like to start by thanking everyone at the Political Network for Values for putting this event together. It's very impressive and much appreciated. I know how difficult that process can be. It's very flattering to be invited to comment on the validity of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights after 75 years. As most of you know, the Universal Declaration was intended to distill universal human rights and values common to all humanity and was drafted by representatives from different countries, political systems, cultures, languages, and religions. The drafters, led by Eleanor Roosevelt, ultimately settled on 30 articles expressing those universal rights, including the freedoms of expression, religion, movement, and assembly. The Universal Declaration also affirmed the right to life, the right to property, the prohibition of slavery, and the concepts of dignity, equality, and due process. The UN General Assembly, then comprised of only 58 nations, adopted the Universal Declaration in 1948, with 48 nations voting in favor and none opposed. The Universal Declaration remains the foundation upon which the UN human rights framework is built, and the contribution of the Universal Declaration to human rights was and remains immense. But it is under assault. It is under assault by authoritarian governments who disregard and violate the rights of their citizens. It is under assault in a UN system that prioritizes politics over even treatment of human rights situations, with bias against Israel being the most obvious example of that. Those examples are often remarked upon, and I have little to say about them beyond what has already been said. What I want to highlight instead is a third assault on human rights from those who claim to be its most fervent defenders. The human rights advocates who seek to expand the number of rights and distort their interpretations in ways never envisioned by those who drafted the Universal Declaration. In recent decades, human rights advocates have sought to reinterpret the original rights codified in the Universal Declaration or assert new rights through various multilateral agreements. The sheer scope of this effort is staggering. As noted by former Secretary of State Michael Pompeo, the original 30 rights in the Universal Declaration have now proliferated into over 1,300 rights provisions and 64 agreements. These new rights encompass a variety of matters, including asserted rights to a healthy environment, a right to peace, a right to development, a right to sexual orientation and gender identity, and many other issues. So you may wonder what's wrong with expanding the scope of human rights. Unfortunately, more rights do not translate into more justice, more freedom, or more protection for individuals. The proliferation of rights and the desire to advance them without preference dilutes the attention and resources that can be applied to strengthening any one of them. This is a key takeaway from the First Principles on Human Rights series that the Heritage Foundation published in 2020, and some copies of the report are available in the room. We live in a world of limited time and limited resources. Trade-offs are unavoidable. As new rights rise in importance, resources shift from fundamental rights and freedoms and the attention that can be made to defending them. For instance, by prioritizing rights based on sexual orientation and gender identity, the Biden administration is by definition spending less time on promoting fundamental rights and basic freedoms in their dialogue with other nations. In addition, the more rights there are, the more likely they are to come into conflict with one another. For instance, the Secretary General has championed a right to be free from offensive hate speech, and he has proposed a, quote, dedicated capacity in the United Nations Secretariat to scale up the response to online mis- and disinformation and hate speech, unquote. The potential conflicts with the internationally recognized right to freedom of expression are obvious. Policing speech will not prevent hate, but it will facilitate censorship. Likewise, how can a right to abortion, which many human rights organizations assert, not inherently conflict with the right to life? Finally, the proliferation of rights undermines their universality by aiding deflection and obfuscation by cynical governments who excuse their rights violations by pointing to other benefits, whether true or not. For example, when confronted with evidence that they torture or illegally imprison their own citizens, repressive states often point to their constitutionally guaranteed rights to health care, water, education, or other benefits. This troubling trend is why the U.S. State Department launched the Commission on Unalienable Rights in 2019 to bring together human rights experts from across the political spectrum. Their report, published in 2020, reached a number of different conclusions on how nations should address and consider these new rights claims. They concluded that the new rights claims should be treated skeptically and recommended that before endorsing new rights, policymakers should carefully consider, first, how closely the new rights claims are rooted in the rights laid out in the Universal Declaration. Second, their consistency with domestic legal traditions. Third, whether other like-minded nations have formally given their sovereign consent to those claimed rights. Fourth, whether there is a clear consensus of support among the many cultures and traditions of the human family for those claimed rights. And fifth, whether the new rights can be integrated into the existing human rights rubric without harmful conflicts. While based on the U.S. experience, I think these guidelines are useful and have application in other countries as well. But fixing the problem also requires action in the UN system. The sad reality is that the multilateral system has too frequently fallen short of fulfilling the promise of the UN Charter to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, equality, and the dignity and worth of the human person. The evolution of human rights discourse over the past few decades has made this challenge harder, not easier. Pursuing new, increasingly esoteric rights claims while ignoring the fact that much of the world's population has yet to enjoy the rights laid out in the Universal Declaration does a huge disservice to the billions of people who are too fearful to speak their opinions, to protest their government, or to practice their religion. Basic human rights and fundamental freedoms are under assault all over the world. Too often, the UN finds itself unable to confront human rights violators about their repression. There needs to be a reassessment. The core and focus of international human rights efforts needs to be on securing and defending basic human rights and fundamental freedoms. In the UN system, only the member states can force the UN to reorient and recapture the dream embodied by the Universal Declaration. I hope that you will urge your governments to lead that charge. Thank you very much.